Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to discuss the complaints of the early arriving British that the Maasai were treating them as slaves. And this comes from the book, The East Africa Protectorate, that is written by one Sir Charles Eliot. And this book was published in 1905. Now, Sir Charles Eliot was the Commissioner of British East Africa. He was like the highest ranking British officer in the land that was known as the East Africa Protectorate, and that is the land that later on became the Kenyan colony and of course later on the Republic of Kenya. Now, this is a very detailed book, covers the geography, the history, the people, the potential of the land, and maybe everything else that he thought was going to interest British who was thinking of moving to this land. Now, there's a part of the book where he's talking about the Maasai as a people, where he mentions that there were the British, the earliest to come, who say that the Maasai were very rough on them, and the Maasai would treat them as slaves, and the Maasai would require them to pay up when they passed through their land, and that the Maasai also did not tolerate slavery among or from their people. So the Swahili traders and the Arabs would just pay up and move through or pass through, but not touch any of their people. Now, here is what he says about that. He says, in 1859, they actually sacked Vanga. These are the Maasai. They resisted the Arab slave dealers with success and forced all travelers to pay hongo or tribute. Nor were Europeans treated at first with more respect. Thompson had to pay tribute in 1883 and speaks of the atrocious life one is compelled to live among the Maasai savages. They ordered us about as if we were so many slaves. He quotes somebody by the name Thompson saying that. But shortly afterwards, a series of disasters overwhelmed them, and the flocks on which they depend, famine repeated, attacks of cattle plague and smallpox. The Wakamba and other enemies attacked them, and the increase of European influence stopped the raids on which they depended to make good their losses. Their attitude towards us has, however, been friendly. This is generally ascribed to the advice of the old medicine man Mbatian, the father of Lenana, who when dying summoned the tribe, and after foretelling the epidemics which would destroy men and cattle, say that the white men will come, of whom the Maasai were to make friends. This wise advice is doubtless emphasized in the minds of the Maasai by the consideration that among the other natives, every man's hand is against them. There are a few things that we can talk about from that statement. Of course, there is the talk of them. Before this statement, he discusses how the Maasai covered a very large part of the land, and they used to be very fierce fighters, and they used to be feared a lot by other people, and how they moved all the way to the coast, and they will attack and sack places, and then of course they, as he says, they stopped or they defended or prevented the slave trading by the Arabs, and they were so successful at it. And they also used to charge a tribute or hongo for anybody who wanted to pass through their land. And now he talks about getting reports by this one person by the name Thompson, who says that the Maasai used to treat them so roughly, and they didn't care that you were European. In fact, he says that they used to treat them like slaves when they went or lived or tried to pass through their land. Something interesting happens in this part of the book, or we get to see something very interesting, and that is the transitioning of the Maasai from being so fierce anti-European to being very friendly to the European. And while the Maasai were a republic, we can see why the Europeans preferred having that one strong person, and that's why they hated republic so much. You can see it working here, that were it not for Mbatian, the chief, the high priest, to tell the people that, hey, people, you should accept these people and make friends with them, the Maasai would likely not have made friends with the Europeans, and they would have most likely continued to resist them right into colonial times. But seems like Mbatian is the one who made them to kind of like step back and be friendly to them. And I suspect it's likely that they reached out to him and they did have private conversations with him. Most likely there were gifts or some privileges that were received. And then, of course, he decided to have this talk with the Maasai as he was about to pass on. You might ask why, and he was about to anyway die. But remember that his son was to become the next high priest, And he probably had been promised that if you are going to work with us, we are going to make sure that your son becomes a very powerful individual. And he actually became a very powerful individual during the colonial time. That's Lenana I'm talking about. And so we can say that there was a motivation on the side of Mbatian to tell the people to be friendly. And it's unfortunate, but we have to say it or speculate about it. It's likely that it was for personal gain or the gain of his family, which happened. And the Lenana became this very influential figure during the colonial times. And today we have even a high school, a national school named after him, the Lenana High School. Those are my random thoughts.